Hello and welcome everyone. My name is Slade Sundar. I'm a consultant for startups from Silicon Valley, and I have some fans in the audience. And my job is to actually save startups that are in kind of a debt spiral, that are starting to fail, that are having critical issues. So today what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through a little bit of my background, how I got into kind of this strange realm of consulting where I'm only consulting for failing startups, and then give you a couple of examples of clients that I've worked for, their issues, and my hope is that you'll take away something from the issues that my clients have had and what I've solved for them, and prevent some issues that may be stirring up in your startup without you even knowing about it. So before I get started talking about myself for the next hour or so, I'd like to get to know about you guys. So I'm going to do a quick audience poll, and basically if I say something and it matches you or your startup, just raise your hand just so I get a sense of who you are and kind of the background that you have. So how many founders are in the room? Okay, that's good. How many employees of those founders are in the room? Okay, there's only a few. It'll get really awkward later, so yeah, don't worry about it. So how many have a startup that have been around for 2 years or more? Okay, 5 years or more? No? Okay. So I'm assuming the rest of you are 2 years or less? Yeah? Okay. Been through an accelerator? Raise your hands up higher. If you've been through an accelerator, yeah, more power to you. Okay, good. Raised more than $1 million in funding? Okay, great. And then let's see. Have a plan, not just wishful thinking, to have a successful exit in the next 5 years. Okay. And then the last one is how many are you guys? Are you technical founders? Okay, and then non-technical. Okay, great. All right. So now that I know a little bit about you, I'll start talking about myself. So I started my career about 18 years ago as a front-end designer. There was no such thing as a front-end developer. We were just all kind of playing in different things back then. And I haven't had what you'd consider a linear background. So I jumped around from being a front-end designer to doing a little bit of code to getting into advertising, went into HR, so I kind of went all across the place, and then ultimately ended up in operations. I've worked in various sectors, so I've worked in nonprofit, I've worked in government, I've worked in Fortune 500, I've worked in small startup, medium-sized startup, and let's see, I'm missing one, but it'll probably come
Charity.
to me. What?
Charity?
Well, yeah, nonprofit, charity. And small business, so an established small business I've also worked for. But what you probably will care about most is that most recently I was the chief operating officer of a startup in the US called Race Partner. It's a software as a service. They did endurance registration, so that's marathon registration along with a fundraising component. I was there for about 6 years. In that time, we tripled revenues, we grew to 3 locations, and probably the two best things were that we moved from a national market to an international market, and we became, from out of nowhere essentially in 6 years, became one of the top 5 registration providers, and we're competing with publicly traded companies. And so we were private the entire way through. After 6 years, we merged with another company called Achieve, and I took that opportunity to look at new adventures. So I took my exit, and my plan was to relax. But then I got a call out of the blue from a friend who knew that I was in relaxing mode, and he said, "So you're really good at like this operational growth stuff, right?" And I said, "Well, I'm pretty good at it." And he said, "Well, I have a friend who's a founder, and he's having some issues. Would you be willing to meet with him and chat with him about his issues?" And I said, "Sure, why not?" And he said, "Okay, but it's going to be a little weird because we're going to have to meet at a place that I can't tell you about right now, and you can't tell anyone that you're meeting with this guy." And I said, "Okay." So for some reason, I decided to go along with this creepy, weird meeting where I didn't know who I was meeting or where I was going. And so I ended up meeting with the guy. He had a startup about 3 years in, had raised about $6 million, and he was having issues where he had 3 months of runway left. So $6 million, 3 months of runway left after 3 years. Yeah. So So his problem was that he was about to unlock another milestone from a VC, but they were nowhere close to doing it. They had operational issues. They just couldn't get the product out the door. So it seemed like a great challenge. It was interesting because they had a very thick NDA for me to sign right then and there. And so I rolled up my sleeves. I signed the biggest NDA that I've probably ever seen. For people who don't know what an NDA is, it's a non-disclosure agreement. And I started working for their startup. So I went in, and my process is that I kind of go in. Not really undercover, but in some of the startups that I've worked for, I haven't been able to tell them that I'm there to fix certain issues, which has been interesting as well. But basically, from there, long story short with that one is I solved their issues in 3 months. I got them their next chapter. It was very stressful. I'm surprised I still have hair. But I didn't realize that this was a market at all, failing startups, until probably my next meeting. So the founder that I was introduced to that I had saved their business wanted another clandestine meeting, and he called it that. He's like, I'm going to have you meet in a weird place, back of a coffee shop, and I can't tell you who we're meeting with, and again, same rules apply. So I said, okay, fine. So I didn't realize that this was a lucrative market, but I think it dawned on me when we sat down and he leaned over and he said, this is my friend, Slade Sundar. He's my guy, and he's like Mr. Wolf. So Mr. Wolf is a character from Pulp Fiction that comes in kind of in the middle of the movie when everything's going all to hell, and he's this guy who's fairly well dressed, put together, just comes in and he's like, here's what you need to do, here's how I'm going to fix your problems. So once he made that comparison, I was like, did I just start a business doing this? And essentially I did. So my company's name is Slash Strategy. I'm the sole consultant, and what I'm going to do today is go through a little bit of what I've done for companies, and again, hopefully you'll be able to take something from this and prevent it from happening in your companies. So I can't tell you the exact names of the companies because I would violate my NDA, but I can tell you what type of companies they were, or still are. They're not were. So many of them have all of them have been funded between 5 and 40 million is what they had. The majority of them, other than 2, had been through accelerators, and those span. There's a few other accelerators as well, but those are the most well known. Education, they're either the founders or the top level management had Ivy League backgrounds, and the time that they've been in operation, 2 years or longer, that seems to be the dropping off point. And the locations have been in London, San Francisco, and New York. So I know a lot of you are probably looking at this wishing that this was your scenario, that this is like you're probably drooling at this. And you wouldn't be wrong. I think that a lot of people in San Francisco wish they have the first 4 bullet points here. But keep in mind that these are all companies that had to hire me to save them. And it reminds me of a quote that a mentor of mine told me a long time ago, which is, everyone starts off with 2 bags. A bag full of luck and an empty bag of experience. And so the goal is to fill the bag of experience before your luck runs out. And usually you could probably directly translate luck to cash in a lot of these situations. But some of the stories that I'm going to tell you, you're probably going to realize, and I don't mean this to sound disparaging, but the experience bag may have had a few holes in it. So when they put experience in, it kind of came out the bottom. So we had to fix those holes first. But yeah, there was a lot of things that I went through that made me think of this quote. And so the first issue that I noticed that was kind of a trend among a lot of the companies that I was consulting with is it seemed to be like a little bit of a touchy issue. I think this is a safe space. It happens to everyone. It's going to happen to you as a founder, whether you're male or female, and you shouldn't be embarrassed about it. But it's something that I call premature evaluation of product. So I'm going to tell you about 3 clients that went down the product path in different ways. And then what I'll do is I'll wrap up at the end how I actually used one process that you can use to solve that issue before it ever becomes an issue. So the first client was a B2B product, had a great first year in selling their product. They had a singular core feature set that rivaled their competition. And one of the reasons it rivaled their competition was that it was simple to use, it was very easy to use. And that first year, they started to pull, their focus wasn't to pull away clients from their competition, it was to serve their specific customer set. But then they started to see that, okay, we're getting a lot of people from these clients. They're switching over when they're saying, well, who did you use before? It was one of their big clients, one of their big competitors. So over time, what had happened is they started to shift their focus. They essentially threw away their roadmap, which was strange, but they did that, and they reformulated their roadmap to directly compete with features that their competitor had. By the time they got to me, they were losing clients, even the clients that they had brought on, and they couldn't really figure out why. The second customer is my favorite customer, or client. So this is an actual page from their product. This customer intentionally left blank. I think it started off as a joke, but this client, they got funded, they had their customer set, and then they started to grow, and they started to get more users, and then they somewhere started to pivot. And because they pivoted so many times, they lost sight of who their actual customer was. And so someone had the bright idea to do what they do in legal contracts, where they leave a blank page because it's intentional, and they put customer intentionally left blank. So when I'm trying to solve their product issues and I'm going through their product plans and look product roadmap, this pops up instead of an actual customer profile. Like, that's all they had. And so when I was talking to the founders and I said, well, why don't you have an actual profile of your customer? And they said, well, it keeps changing. So our funding is based on getting to user milestones, and so we're in the business right now of getting users, and we'll figure out which of those users are actually going to be our core later on. And this thinking is, you might think it's just, okay, that's a really stupid thing to think, but that's actually fairly common in terms of the clients that I've been working with and a lot of the startups that I've seen. It seems to be this mentality of get users first, figure it all out later. And so the third startup that had product issues was another B2B product, and they were very customer centric. So they had their first round of funding, they had a great product start, and then they wanted to be so customer centric that they essentially handed off the product development features or function to their customers. They didn't mean to, I don't think, but I think that what started to happen is they started to listen to their customers a little bit too closely. And so this is actually, I don't know how many of you will remember this, but The Simpsons had an episode probably in 1991, so I'm dating myself, where Homer Simpson, the main character, finds his long-lost brother. His long-lost brother has a car company. And so his brother is like, hey, I am looking to create a car for the average guy. And so he starts to hang out with Homer. He realizes Homer is like the epitome of the average guy, 9-to-5 job, 2 kids, wife, dog, works at a power plant. And so he says, you know what, I'm gonna have you design a car that I'm gonna sell to the average guy. And so Homer comes up with a car that he calls the Homer, which is perfect for him, but no one else liked. And so that's exactly what happened to this company, is that they started to hand off the product development function. So the product development team and the product management team were essentially just they were like ticket takers. They were like, oh, okay, you want this product, we'll schedule it. Or you want this feature, we'll schedule it. So by the time they got to me, had a very bloated feature set, losing customers again. So before I move forward, I'm going to give you guys a chance, because I'm pretty sure a lot of you are probably smarter than me. What do you think the process I used was to solve all 3 of these issues? Anyone? You can just take a guess. Yeah?
Market research?
Kind of. There's a component of that, but close. Say that again?
Product market fit?
Yeah. It's in there too.
Customer development?
And there's a little bit of that. Okay, so it's actually something that we don't think as a process, it's creating our minimal viable product. So if you take that process that you use as minimal viable product and go through the same risk assessment and testing your features and everything that all of you said put together, but this is usually only done in the beginning stage. But if you go back to this core, which is what I did with all three of these clients, it becomes really easy to define who your customer is. It becomes really easy to define what features you should have and where the roadmap should go, because now you're limiting your focus. And I have to say that each of my clients absolutely hated going through this process again. And when I asked them like why they were so resistant to it, is they're like, we've grown up from this. We've grown up from MVP. This is something that we did early on, and now we feel like we're back in kindergarten. But I implore you not to think of it that way. It's a standard for a reason, and you should be constantly doing that with new features. You should have MVP kind of in your head as you move forward with any of your products, and you should look and see where your roadmap is and see if you can do an MVP slice and say, does it still make sense? Does it still make sense to where we need to go? Does anyone know who these guys are? No? I mean, they're the IKEA guys, but I think they actually have a name. Does anyone know the name of the guys? No? I need to look that up, but I was hoping one of you guys knew. So this is one of my clients is probably one of my favorite and most stressful clients. These were two founders that were non-technical founders, and when I got called in, they had just, I guess for 6 months ago, had gotten a call where their CTO, who was not a founder, left and took the top talent from the development team and went to a completely different company. And these two non-technical founders, instead of calling for help or talking to their board, decided that they could fix it. And so that they stepped in because they said, well, how hard could it be? We still have some development team members left. They know the roadmap. And so 6 months later, I get a call. And yeah, again, I'm surprised I have hair. But it was an interesting process to go through, one, their thinking process, because it was one of those things that they came out with to their employees, to their board, to their investors, as this was a planned departure. We're so efficient with our product that we don't need. I mean, I was reading through the email and I was just like, I don't know how you sold this, but you guys are really great at selling it, because it was the CTO and 4 members of their 10-person team. So that to me was phenomenal. But how we solved this issue was actually fairly simple. It was a simple approach. I sent one of the founders to a coding bootcamp. So that was my next slide, which is, I didn't send them to Lewagon. I didn't know, this is in San Francisco, so Lewagon wasn't in San Francisco. While I filled in for the technical translating role, we got a vendor on board. We went through the process of kind of just figuring out everything that we needed to do to get the product roadmap back to the right direction. And it was a mess. They had so many different plans. So you could just imagine if you gave your product roadmap to someone who had no clue what a product roadmap should look like. So for me, it was part of it was staying on board, translating some of the technical things into non-technical speak for the founder that was still running the business, and really sending the other one off to boarding school. Because I have a firm belief, and especially after this experience, that if you're not one of the technical founders, get some technical knowledge. You cannot be in a startup industry. No matter what you're doing, it's going to require technology. And it's a simple thing to be able to avoid if you just have the knowledge, because they could have hired better. So they were trying to hire people, and there are a lot of smooth talkers out there that can talk tech but actually can't implement tech. So they got taken. So their interim CTO was doing all the wrong stuff. And it's very simple to take a 9-week boot camp and at least get up to speed on the tech talk so that people aren't taking you for a ride. So I would definitely recommend, if you're not a tech founder, find 9 weeks, either do Lewagon, or I would say do Lewagon because they're the ones who are doing the series, so that's a shameless plug. But if not that, find a way to, even in your teams will educate you. So take the time to sit down with your teams. If you're not the technical person, get some technical knowledge. And so one of the biggest probably problems in the startup world, across all, I think, business, is management sucks. And this is not a new problem. Dilbert has been around for like 30 years, and I don't know how they keep coming up with actual new material, but it's actually new, and I'm like, gosh, that's happened somewhere. But I started to look at this, and every one of the companies that I consulted for also, no matter if they had a product issue or they had an operational issue, they also had a management issue. So I started to think about, like, why is this? And a few of the ones that had been accelerated, I started, when I talked to them, I said, well, why is your structure set up this way? Why aren't you more directly involved in actually managing? You've kind of outsourced that to some other people, and they're like, well, I have to delegate. And I said, I understand that, but you're so far removed from your company. And a few of them responded, well, we have to be like James Bond. And that's, I guess that's a common thing that is taught in YC, and it makes sense. It makes sense from a growth perspective. Like James Bond, he's able to deal with any situation. He's go, go, go. It's a mentality that they have you adopt at YC. And I think some people, I don't think they exactly tell you how to implement it. There were a few founders that had pictures of James Bond in their office, which I thought was a little weird, but okay. I mean, to each their own, right? But they were just like, yeah, I have to be the one who's always like putting out the fires. And while that's true, at some point when your product evolves and you've been in business for 3 to 4 years, you have to look at maybe not being James Bond and maybe turning into MI6. So for those of you who don't watch James Bond, 1, I'm sorry, but 2, MI6 is the organization that James Bond works for. So he's an employee. And so when you look at building your business, you should actually be building it, and maybe you'll have a few James Bond to handle some of those things, and maybe every once in a while you'll need to step in, like the head of MI6, which I think is, her name is M, and then in the old series was a guy named M. So, but you will need to be versatile, you'll need to grow, but you'll need to grow beyond the confines of James Bond. Because could you imagine James Bond being your boss, just for a second? The guy blows everything up. He sleeps with pretty much everyone. He has no regard for, he's pretty much a jerk. And you're probably thinking I've just described like 90% of Silicon Valley, and you wouldn't be wrong. But we're trying as a community, trying to like change that. So maybe this will change in YC. Maybe they'll actually give a little more guidance with the whole James Bond thing. Or maybe it'll just be people will interpret it the way they want. I don't know. But part of building your company is getting great managers, and so you can't be disconnected. You can't outsource that. You have to be a part of getting that great management. And so that brings me to the second reason why management in startups sucks, is because of this pose. So whenever I get into companies and I start to interview the managers, and I see managers that have been new managers. They've been newly promoted. They were excellent developers, excellent marketing people, maybe employees number 5 and 6 in the company, and they're managers. And I ask them, I'm like, what's your management style? How do you deal with different things? And this is actually the response. And let me tell you that this should never be your response for anything. You will never get a husband or a wife doing this. Don't do it. Just that should never be something that you or any of your employees ever do. Because if you do that, that means that you're ill-prepared and ill-equipped to manage people. So people management is a skill unto its own. It does take training. There are very few people who have a skill in something else and are just promoted to be a manager and can just all of a sudden impart knowledge and nurture the team. And it takes effort, it takes time. So I started to figure out that there is essentially what I like to call how bad managers are born, or the management cycle of doom. And this happens more often than probably all of us would like to admit. You have the employee goal of, I've been working my ass off for 3 years. I definitely deserve more money. I want a better title, and maybe power over the interns would be great because they're running me ragged. And the founder's goal from that perspective is I want to keep the employee happy so that they stay, because I really don't want to have to hire someone else. And maybe they'll do a good job. And that's essentially what happens to create a bad manager. And maybe you'll get lucky, and maybe they'll be a great manager, but probably not. So this is how I see great managers are born. You have the employee goal, which is getting the team working better together. And you have the founder's goal of you want the team to work better together. And you might think that that's a very strange employee goal, but I know that each of you probably have an employee that doesn't have the title right now that is working to bring the team together. And that's the person that you want to promote, because that person has management skills. And so when those two goals come together, then that person will get the money and they will get power, but hopefully they're not thinking about it in the way of power. But you also have to give them training and mentorship, and if it's not you should go out and get it from either a consultant or send them to like a management boot camp, just so that they can learn things like emotional intelligence, just awareness, understanding how to diffuse conflict, not slamming doors. That's like a big one. Just I don't know why, but there's a big issue of doors slamming. So some startups might just get rid of doors. I don't know, but you want to look for those key elements of emotional intelligence. Like they're aware, they don't care if they get the credit. Those make great managers. Those make great leaders because they're going to elevate everyone around them. And it takes a very special individual to not want to take credit and will give the team credit. And that's something that shouldn't go unnoticed. So this is where I kind of dive into culture, because culture is another thing that I've noticed across all the companies that they contact me and they have a specific issue like operations, or they're just some technical issue, or they're not able to use their funds correctly. At the root of it all always seems to be a bad culture. And ultimately, this scenario is probably one that makes me the angriest, I think. But it all worked out in the end, but I was brought in because there were operational issues. Things weren't getting delivered on time, sprints were being changed up too much in the middle, team communication was bad, so I was brought in to say, okay, well, they've tried to fix it a couple of times, they brought in some other consultants, but it just didn't work, so I was brought in to figure it out and make it work. So I spent, the way I do discovery is I go into the company, I'll sit in meetings, I will claim to be whatever they tell me to claim to be, a product consultant or whatever, and I ask stupid questions and I make people laugh, and just kind of get involved in the process for anywhere from a week to 2 weeks to 3 weeks. The goal is to get people to trust me so that they can open up and be themselves around me. And so in this company, there was a ton of backstabbing. There was a ton of infighting. Everyone was power playing everyone else. It was no wonder that work wasn't getting done. So when I met with the two founders, we met over a beer, which was free because the founder and the company gave free beer. And so I sat down and I was drinking the beer, and I said, well, and they said, how's it going? I said, it's pretty good. I think I have a lot of information now. And I said, well, how would you describe your culture? And one of the founders, I can say this because I'm here, a very American founder. I mean, just whatever you think of the stereotype of American is, it was him. And he raised his mug and he said, our culture is great. We give everyone free beer. And then he took a sip, and I took a sip, and then I laughed, because I thought he was joking. And then I said, no, really, like, what's your culture? Like, tell me the components, what makes it so that people can work together. And then he went from being a fun American to a very angry American. And I could say that because I'm American. But he started to get in my face. He's like, we didn't hire you to fix our culture. Our culture is fine. We hired you to fix the operational issues that we have. And he went on and on and on. I said, okay. Well, let me put together kind of a report, and we can talk through it. And so it took about probably 5 weeks for me to convince him. The other founder came on board pretty easily because essentially I was starting to name names and tell him what was happening, and essentially I was giving them context as to, oh, that product launch went wrong? Well, I can give you the 12 reasons why it happened that way. So when they started to see people's names and said, oh yeah, I guess he can be a little, energetic, and they were using all these euphemisms because they just didn't want to deal with the fact that their employees were crazy. Super awesome people. Sorry, I don't mean to say that they're crazy, but the culture that had evolved was just this like Game of Thrones style, like, I don't even know. But they had free beer. So, and I think there was a quote somewhere that I read a long time ago, which I don't know if it was written about this company, and I hope not, because then, yeah, anyway. But it was, if you have free beer and you hate your job, you just have a shitty job with free beer. Like, it doesn't change anything, you just have free beer. And you could go buy beer if you had a better job anyway. So it's like beer is not like one of those things that can just make your culture great. But this brings up the whole idea of what culture is. And when we talk about culture, it's not necessarily like, does everyone get along? Are they having fun? Like, that's not culture. No one cares about that. And I don't mean that in a mean way. I'm just saying when you're in a business, it's about performance culture. What about your culture is allowing people to perform at their best, are allowing people to communicate with each other on the same page, and are allowing you to get to your goals. And so what I had to work with this founder and pretty much every other founder was this process that I call goals to culture. So you start with your goals and you work backward to determine what your culture is going to look like. And your culture is all inclusive of these 4 things. The mission, your values, the environment, and operations all go together to form your culture. And so what I have in the red is essentially just the translation. Your mission is your goal. That's the one goal that you're trying to accomplish. And you can have sub-goals, but your mission is your main goal. And then you have your values, which are essentially your philosophy. Like, how do you want people to act in certain situations? When they're posed with the question, do your values help them answer the question and make the right decision? And then the environment is the attitude, because you can have a value of partnership where you're trying to help everyone, and then you can also have an attitude that uses that in a negative way. You could say, well, where was my partnership, man? Like, I thought you were going to help me out on this. Like, why can't you stay late and do this for me? Where's your partnership? And I have seen that, where values get twisted because of the environment and the attitude. And then you have operations, which is all of the processes. And the reason I have these little arrows back and forth is because all of these support each other. So the mission is used to create the values, and the values support the mission. The values are used to reinforce the environment, and the environment affects the values, and so on and so forth. So if you have a certain culture and a certain value system where you explore free thought, you can't come down here and create processes that lock everyone into 20 levels of approval. You're breaking your culture. It doesn't fit. Everything has to make sense. And as your company evolves and as you change sizes and pivot, and this always has to be a part of what you're looking at. So if you're looking at your long-term plans and they don't have any of your values in there, because that's your decision-making philosophy, they don't reference your mission, and you just have a bunch of like siloed goals, you're probably going to run into an issue where once you get past 6 people and you get to 20 people, if this hasn't been defined, you're now allowing other people to just come in and define this for you. Like, they will, especially the environment, and that one, it's something that you have to do constant upkeep on. That means that the founders, the top management, have to be talking about all of this and what the company looks like, so that new people and people who may have been there for a while that may be burnt out don't get sucked into a negative attitude and start to change your culture and values. Because values are what's stated, but the environment and the attitudes can change those values into something really ugly. So you want to make sure that you're always doing that. And so I came in and I provided them with a framework to consistently monitor that and to look at checkpoints when they're on their growth. So as they're growing, to see where, okay, are all these in check? And that's it. I just want to thank you guys and Le Wagon for being out here, and I'm sure you guys have a lot of questions, or maybe no questions at all, and that would be great too. But thank you very much. Yes.
Given your experience with the Homer, what is your advice for a startup who's in product design and who values customer feedback, maybe even further, customer iteration as an essential component of the business plan to prevent ending up with a Homer?
A strong product team. I mean, that's a very generic response, but essentially you have to have your mission is really core to that, because we always want to please the customer, and we get into this rut of pleasing the customer a little bit too much. But I think there was a misattributed quote from Henry Ford, who said, like, if I did what people asked me, I would have made faster horses. I'm not sure if he actually said that, but it's a great quote. To actually prevent that, you as a founder have to be having conversations with your product team. It can't just go off and be this thing that you check in once a month. It has to be, how are these features, how are these products that we're building meeting the goal? And again, going through that MVP process of saying, okay, let's just take a slice, let's take an offsite and go and do this. And you don't have to set up a huge offsite. It can just be with the product team and have people poke holes in some of the customer requests, because I can guarantee you that there are product managers or developers, especially developers, and they if you have a development team that's quiet, that's scary. Like, you shouldn't. Most developers are pretty vocal, at least the ones that I know. But you can bring them into an environment where it's safe to say what doesn't make sense for our mission and where we're going, and that will provide you with more information than you'd get just from doing your normal stuff. You kind of have to disrupt your own organization in that way and just kind of pull people away and say, I want to talk about this, and it's okay to say, you put the guide rules around it, like don't curse out someone who's pushed through a feature that you don't like, but like, let's do pros and cons and see where this fits in our marketplace and see if it makes sense for our business and where our plan is going. This also assumes, though, that you've shared your plan with all of your team members. So there's kind of that. So I don't know if that answers your question. Yeah? Okay.
Yeah. What percentage of your clients would you say are first-time founders?
Let's see. I would say it was probably about 10%.
Really?
Yeah. A few of them were serial entrepreneurs, and that's how they describe themselves. And I've gotten to the point now where whenever I hear that, I kind of just think like, oh, so you don't know how to run. Yeah. It's essentially those are, and that's a big difference. I was going to put that in my presentation, but talking about like when you should go for VC money and when you should not go for VC money, and it just depends on your goals. Like, some people want to build companies, some people are building investment vehicles. Neither are wrong, but knowing what you need to do to get to a 3-year exit versus building a 20-year lifetime company, those are two different, models.
Do you find that founders are actually like how do they receive your criticism when you say you're doing this thing and you should be doing something else? Like having worked with a few founders, I don't think it's something that's very easy to do. So
No, yeah. There's a lot of screaming in my line of work. So yeah, it's I've had 2 founders that were just like, oh, okay, like, yeah, that makes sense. And I was like, wow, that was really great. The rest of them, they're just like, what you're saying is bullshit. Sorry, but they do. They just say, they use more colorful words than that. And then it's the process of, first I tell them how it is, and then I kind of back into it with data to show them, and I say, well, then I start asking them questions. Like, so if this isn't the case, how do you explain X, Y, and Z? And so usually that process, in the longest case, I think took 4 weeks of just like wearing them down. Luckily, I was paid up front, so that was good. But I essentially, when I give them these recommendations, I say, it's your company, you're about to fail. For me, it doesn't matter. Like, I'm just trying to help you because I was referred to you. Like, I didn't seek your business. So for me, it's a little bit easier to have the harder conversation, just because I'm in a position where I'm just like, it's not like I reached out to you and you found me on Facebook and got a little marketing thing. Like, someone referred me to you because you haven't been able to do what you need to do, so I'm giving you a different way. But it's hard. I mean, it's essentially, and I understand it too, it's going in and saying, and I don't put it in this way, but this is what they're hearing, is that you've been doing everything wrong. Your baby is an ugly baby, and you need to make your baby not ugly. And so that's the way that they look at it, but that's not really the way that I present it. I try to present it in a nice way, but they will always yell at me, and I think part of it is just being okay with like, I understand that, because if someone was gonna start commenting on something that was so personal that I invested that much time and energy into, I think that I would probably react the same way. I hope I don't, but I think I would. But yeah, they usually don't take it well. Oh, yeah.
So challenge you found most difficulty?
I would say it was the beer culture. Okay, yeah, that was difficult, because that took the most convincing to make the founders understand that their issues were really culture issues. And I knew I had it when I said, you have operations problems, who does the operations? And so the founder said, well, the people. And I said, okay, so if you have operation problems, do you think maybe you have, and then he's like, people problems? I was like, yes, you got it. But that like literally took forever. Like, it was not like an easy thing. It took a long time. I think changing founders' mindsets is by far so much harder, because the amount of data that you need, and then just the internal bias that they have. Like, as founders, we will always have this bias that what we're doing is the most amazing, first time, best. And you have to be in that bubble. You have to be in that bubble to succeed, because there's going to be so many people telling you you're wrong. And I find that I think the founders, the beer founders, I could understand why they were so resistant, because they were fundraising forever before they got their first amount. Like, so they're used to people just telling them what they're doing. Oh, that's never going to work, never going to work, never going to work. But they had kind of built up that mindset. So that was probably, I think that those situations were the hardest. I think they were the hardest just because I want to say they're American. I don't know. I think that makes it harder, because it's so blunt. Everyone's blunt, and then we're just like, oh, okay. Yeah.
Have you ever been wrong when trying to run, and how did you?
Yes, but I've caught it quickly. So I try not to make assumptions until I have the data, because assumptions can get you, especially when dealing with people. Assumptions can kill you. I mean, so I always try to go in, and no matter what, we're always going to have our biases by the way people are dressed, by the way they talk, even like the color of their laptop bag or the t-shirt that they're wearing. Removing that bias takes a lot of work, just like mentally, because I'll immediately see someone doing something and be like, oh, there's their problem. That person's lazy, but that person didn't end up being lazy. I just saw them on a bad day. So I try to always check my assumptions. It's easier with data, because it's harder to be, not to say harder to be wrong with data. If you know what the right stuff to look at is, then the answer presents itself. But yes, I have been wrong, but not in a situation that made a critical situation worse. So thankfully, yes. Yes. I would say the best thing is to find mentors. I mean, a lot of people, so this process of going through an MBA and then trying to start a business right afterwards, like the MBA gives you a lot of theoretical, and you work in these really nice, neat, enclosed environments. So it doesn't teach you how to actually manage, and any MBA that says, well, you'll learn from managing your crazy classmates, it's not the same. Like, you're not paying your classmates. There's a totally different, just a completely different world. So I would say the best thing to do is, if you're looking to start a company, see if you can intern at a company or get a mentor that'll allow you to shadow them. So, because a lot of the times, you can't just go and get a mentor that'll tell you how to manage people. will inherently start to see how they manage, and you will learn from, so we do this a lot with sales team members. We just have a sales team member shadow another sales team member, and they know the core in terms of like how things should work, and they can see both sides of the equation. They can see how the customer is reacting, they can see what this person's saying. And so even our veteran sales team members, when I was at Race Partner, they would get into a habit of talking a certain way to a client, and the new person would figure out, even though this person's a veteran, I think it would have been better if we would have done X, Y, and Z, or listened more, or maybe not gone into that feature set. So in the same way that they were shadowing someone, you don't necessarily need someone to tell you, here's how you manage someone, here's how you do this. You just need to be exposed to someone managing, and trust in yourself that seeing both sides of the equation, that you will be able to come up with like that experience, because that's part of the hardest thing, is that if you can't see the other side of the equation when you're a manager, you'll never learn, because you're only seeing it from your perspective. So if you give someone criticism and they storm off, you're like, that person can't take criticism. You never see the side where the way that you gave the criticism could have been tweaked a little bit. So I would say that that would be the best way to do it, is find a mentor that will allow you to shadow them, that's a manager, so that you can see their organization. And they'll probably make you sign an NDA, but that's fine. I don't know who is first. Go with the middle. Hi.
Yes, I was going to kind of do a reverse of that. Have you ever had a situation where you have a company founded by non-technical starters, so they have good business and sector knowledge, but they don't have a technical background? And is sending them off on boot camp, have you ever seen actually work, where they'll go off, do boot camp, come back with technical skills, and then that's great? Or are they better off, just saying, listen, we'll hire someone for the technical side of things? There's only so much you can kind of bootstrap here and then expect to far.
I would say for the managers, I would never recommend that the managers themselves, if they didn't have technical skills, to go and do a 9-week boot camp and become the CTO if they have that vacuum. So if they're starting a company, that's a different story. Like, because you essentially will know enough to be able to prototype and get your MVP, and then you'll be able to hire. And so, but ultimately, unless you are someone who's non-technical that go into it and just love it, and you're like, this is my new career, I wouldn't recommend them just taking over that tech function. But what the benefit is that person goes there, they understand what it takes to actually implement something, the frustration that goes into coding something and hunting down that stupid semicolon that you didn't have. That's like knowledge that will help build a better technical team, because there's more understanding. But yeah, I mean, it really depends on the person, because I've known people who were super creative, went to a boot camp, and came back and were like the best coders I've ever seen. We had, in my last company, we had a customer service person, great on the phone, great with people, said they wanted to go to a boot camp, and they came back, and I was like, oh gosh, this person's gonna hate being a developer. And she loved it, and she was really good at it. And I like envy her, because she has both. She can like be good with people, and so I'm sure she's already a manager. Like, I left a year ago, and I'm sure she's like probably managing a team of developers. But I don't know if did that answer your question a little bit? Yeah, okay. Yes?
What distinction do you find between Silicon Valley and London?
That's a good question, yeah. I would say that in terms of, so I'd have to say, like, in terms of cultural diversity, that is one of the biggest, I would say, that has presented different challenges in the companies that I have consulted for in London than it has in Silicon Valley. So Silicon Valley, while diverse, is not really. I mean, it's primarily Asian, Indian, and Caucasian. Those are the numbers. Here we have a mix of different cultures, different languages. It's very, very different. So I'd say that's a big differentiating factor. In terms of founders, most founders seem to be similar. I mean, it's an archetype. For someone to actually say, I'm going to start a company, they fall within similar. I mean, everyone's different. You all are unique. I'm not saying you're all the same. But but I would say that I haven't seen a difference in like London's very similar to Silicon Valley. I would say New York is a lot different than London or Silicon Valley. New York still has a lot of the old school mentality for startups. So a lot of those companies are hitting the ground running. making money and basically power playing VCs. Like the clients that I've had that have been in New York have required the least amount of help. And it's mostly been on cultural issues. Like that's pretty much it. Like they're like, things aren't working, but we've had a few consultants come in, they don't get us. So it was less that their company was about to fail. It was more like they just had gone through a couple of consultants and they got referred to me. But that one was an easy one, which was great. But it seems like those companies out there, at least from the ones that I've worked with, just have more of a focus on building a sustainable business model. So they don't really seem to get into this I'm running out of runway, which like running out of money creates a lot of these issues very quickly. So getting a lot of money creates a lot of issues, like, you know, more money, more problems kind of thing. But yeah, when that money goes away, it also creates issues. But the New York companies seem to be a little bit more conservative in even the rounds that they raise. So that would be the differences that I've noticed.